My name is Jerry Ellen. I'm 91 years old. I'm a World War II veteran, one of 16 million young men who served our nation between 1941 and 1945 to eliminate the evil of a man, Adolf Hitler, in Germany, and a country, Japan.
How did you get into the armed forces?
I built model airplanes all of my young life, from the time I was 6 or 7 years old. And I had a scholarship to college when I graduated from high school in Hillside, New Jersey in June of 1941. And I was working in a steel mill, putting money away for housing and books and food. And in midsummer 1941, I went to Trenton to Rider College, and I asked if I could enter school in the spring semester of 1942, and they said yes. So I continued to work, and on December 7th at around noon in Hillside, New Jersey, I went down to buy the Sunday newspaper, and the radio was on, talking about Pearl Harbor and the bombing by the Japanese of Pearl Harbor. None of us really knew what or where Pearl Harbor was. Some of us thought it was a girl's name, but of course it was the attack in Hawaii. And I made up my mind that I was going to fly fighter planes against the Japanese because I knew all the World War I fighter pilots because of the models I made.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to the Army in December 41, filled out all the papers, and on my 18th birthday, February 15th, 1942, I presented the papers to my mother and father for signature. And under duress, great duress, they signed the papers. I turned them in. And at that time, you needed to have 2 years of college behind you or pass an equivalent mental exam. The physical, of course, was the same. And in April, I took the exams. I passed the mental exam, and I flunked the physical exam. I had 20/30 vision in one eye. And the doctor told me to go home and stay in a dark room, eat a lot of carrots, and come back and take the test again in 3 days. And I went home, and I asked my mother, who worked on the draft board in Newark, to bring me the eye chart. I memorized the eye chart. And I went back 3 days later, and I passed the examination and received a letter in the mail that I was assigned to an aviation cadet in waiting class of 43H. And in August of 1942, I was inducted into the military at Fort Dix, New Jersey. Got basic training for 2 or 3 months. Went to classification center in Nashville, Tennessee. Take the exams to see whether I qualified to be a bombardier, a navigator, or a pilot. And I qualified for all 3 and chose to become a pilot. So from Nashville, we were sent to Santa Ana, California, long train ride. And we went to pre-flight school. And then in January, mid-January, we went to Phoenix, Arizona for primary flight training at Thunderbird Field in Phoenix, Arizona. And 1 week into my 19th year, on February 22nd, 1943, I soloed and did my cross-country where their instructors in jeeps were sitting on the crossroads of Mesa, Tempe, and Claremont, I think it was, Chandler, Mesa, Tempe, and Chandler. There's 68,000 people living in that county, Maricopa County. Now there's 3 million people. So it was just an empty space. Finished primary, went to basic training in Marana Army Air Base in Tucson, flew an enclosed airplane called the Vultee Vibrator, and then came to Luke Field for advanced training. And at Luke Field, we went to a gunnery school in Gila Bend, Arizona, shot bullets, real bullets, out of an AT-6, had 10 hours in a P-40, and was ready to graduate 2 weeks before the end of August of 1943, and they had a final physical. The number of the physical was a 6.4, and I flunked the eye test. I still had 20/30 vision, but they changed the eye chart. And the doctor told me that I'd come so far, he would let me graduate with my class. and they were going to put me in transport planes. And I said, sir, I'm a fighter pilot. I'm not a transport pilot. I've got 10 hours in a P-40. I'm a fighter pilot. And he said, not if I have anything to say about it. So I said, who can say something about it? He said, the Commandant of Cadets. How do you get to see him? He said, you go through a chain of command. I said, what does that mean? He said, ask me first. Sir, I want to see the Commandant of Cadets. So a day or two later, I'm in front of the Commandant of Cadets. He's sitting at his desk and wearing wings, chicken wings, at full colonel. And he says, what can I do for you, Yellen? I said, sir, I have 20/30 vision in one eye. I've got 10 hours in a P-40. And they want to wash me out, put me in transports. And he looked me square in the eye and said, Yellen, anyone that's got the guts to come to see me, you're a fighter pilot. So I graduated with 10 hours in a P-40 and joined 28 other guys, beginning with the letter R, ending with Z, that were sent to the 78th Fighter Squadron in Hawaii to get 50 more hours of flying time in a P-40. Real flying time, formation flying and strafing missions and gunnery missions and air-to-air dogfight kinds of missions. And they kept 5 of us. Of the 28, there were 5 of us who were kept in the 78th Fighter Squadron.
What was the length of time in the service for you, from when you enlisted to when you left?
I went into service in August of 1943. I came out and discharged in December of 1945. So it was a little over 3 years.
What was your psychology going in, and what was your psychology sort of midway, and then your feeling about the whole thing after you left?
Well, there was no psychology. We were attacked by a foreign nation. 16 million young men joined up or were drafted. I don't know what the ratio is, but I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I didn't have to think about it. I did exactly what I wanted to do. I didn't get into combat until March 7th, 1945, which was quite a long time after I graduated from flying school.
Right.
And it was a moment of joy and pleasure, and I had become a P-51 pilot. I became an element leader, a flight leader, a squadron leader. And being in combat was just the highest degree of honor anybody could have for serving their country in time of war, fighting against the evil of a nation that wanted to control parts of the world and big populations of the world to their way of life. And to me, anyone who is willing to attack and kill any other person for what they believe, for land or for acquisition or control, is evil. So I was fighting evil, and it was a glorious feeling for me. The hard part was losing 16 guys, flying with 16 guys that were killed, 5 of them in training, 11 of them in combat over Japan, and not recognizing that they were gone and they were dead while I was flying in combat, while the war was on. They were just transferred to another place. If I had ever thought that I was going to die or they were going to die, it might have been that I wouldn't have flown, but I never thought that. I knew I was going to live, and they were transferred. In December 1945, I came home, and the reality of what I had done, the reality of war, hit me very hard, as it must hit every other person who learns how to use a weapon to kill somebody else and then does kill other people for their government, for wearing a uniform, and for protecting people who are from being attacked again, winning a war. But the reality of it is we all learn to trade to kill, and there's no detraining from killing. You carry that for the rest of your life. If you do it as a civilian, they put you in jail or they kill you. If you do it for your country, they honor you and give you medals.
You got out after going through the exhilaration of doing this, and then the pride and the acclaim that you got. And then in December of 1945, you were a civilian. And what was that like?
Well, when you join the military and you put a uniform on, you learn a trade. You learn how to use a weapon. whether it's a rifle or a grenade or a tank or a battleship or an airplane. You learn how to kill people. And you also learn something else that very few people know or very few people understand unless they've been there. And what you learn is that you're willing to die to protect the guys that you're with, and they're willing to die to protect you. So that the you in your life becomes more important than the me in your life. And on August 13th, 1945, we went to a briefing. The war, 2 bombs had been dropped, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we were called to a briefing. And we believed the war was over, had been over. That we were going to have to fly a mission again on August 14th. And when the commanding officer, Jim Tapp, was asked why, he said, well, they're negotiating for peace, but the Japs aren't responding fast enough. So we're going to fly a fighter mission over Japan. And they've chosen the code word Ohio. And they have PBYs up in the air close to Iwo Jima, and then B-17s in the air, and then destroyers on the water, and submarines near Japan, all tuned into the same radio frequency. And probably they're going to broadcast the code word Ohio. As soon as that was said, my assigned wingman, Phil Schlomberg from Brooklyn, New York, 19 years old, leaned over to me and said, Captain, if we go, I'm not coming back. And I looked at him. Why do you say that? He says, it's a feeling I have. So I went to Jim Tapp, and I said, Colonel, this is what Phil Schlomberg told me. And Tapp said, you ask him to go to see Doc Lewis, the flight surgeon. You, Jerry, cannot interfere. You can't not intercede. You cannot make the appointment. But if he'll agree to see Doc Lewis might be able to get him off the mission. So I told that to Schlomberg. He said, no way. And the next morning, just before takeoff, I briefed him, told him to stay close on my wing, that they're going to broadcast the code word Ohio on the way up to Japan. We'll turn around and come back. So we took off. We got near the coast of Japan. No one had heard the code word. We dropped our wing tanks, external wing tanks, and went in and strafed airfields.
Let's just pick up there where you had that noise. You could just kind of back up into the story a little bit.
We got near Japan, and we had to drop our external wing tanks. Nobody had heard the code word Ohio. And we went in and strafed airfields not far from Tokyo. We needed 90 gallons of fuel to get back to Iwo Jima from Japan. Someone from our squadron called in. This is Kodak, someone, Blue 1 or Blue 3 or Red 1 or Red 4, 90 gallons. So the entire squadron turned towards the ocean to fly out to get on the wing of the B-29 and go back to Tokyo. We go back from Tokyo to Iwo Jima. And Phil Schlomberg was on my wing. I gave him a thumbs up. He gave me a thumbs up. And I led my flight of 4 airplanes into some clouds, maybe for 30, 40, 50 seconds. And when we came out of the clouds, Schlomberg was gone off my wing. There was no radio contact. There was no visual contact. And when we got back on to Iwo Jima, we found out that while we were strafing, Japan had surrendered for 3 hours prior to that. So this was the last combat mission, fighter combat mission over Japan. And my 19-year-old wingman was the last man killed in combat in World War II. In December 1945, I lived in Newark, New Jersey, and his family lived in Brooklyn, New York. I took his wings and his lieutenant bars and the emblem from his hat, which I had taken from his locker, from his foot locker, and went to Brooklyn, meet his sisters and his mother, and told him what kind of a pilot he was, what kind of a man he was, and how he got killed. We didn't know. And when I left that house in the beginning of a snowstorm, his mother said to me, it should have been you who were killed, Captain, not my son, Philip. I hope you never sleep a night in your life like I can't sleep. That shook me pretty much, and I sat on the stoop of that house in Brooklyn for at least an hour in the snow before I calmed down enough to get in a car and drive to New Jersey. That was the beginning of reality for me. It was the beginning of understanding that 16 young men that I knew had been killed fighting for our country, that more than 400,000 young men were killed who served America, that 60 million people were killed in World War II, the total across all of the battlefields, civilians, and that I had the difficult time of overcoming the stress that was in my body and my heart, in my mind. And I had nightmares every night. I sometimes spoke to the 16 guys one at a time, sometimes thought about suicide day and night. And that went on for 30 years. I really wasn't very much of a nice person. I was a pretty good golfer, and I did a lot of gambling on the golf course. That's how I supported myself. It was an escape. It wasn't a pleasure, something I did for pleasure. It was something to run away from myself for 5 or 6 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week. It kept me sane, if you can call what I was sane. But I didn't have much of a life. I had no interest in money, no interest in a job, no interest in anything except getting through the day. And in 1975, actually I got married in 1949. I met a lady on a blind date, Helene, on Good Friday, which was April 15th. 1949. We got engaged on May 30th and got married on October 22nd, 1949. And our first son was born in 1960, and our fourth son was in 1950. Our first son was born, and our fourth son was born in 1960. And I tried to be a good father, tried to be a good provider, moved 16, 17 times, tried every kind of job that I could think of, last a day, a week, a month, 6 months. And I had no purpose in my life. And then my wife saw Maharishi Mahesh Yogi on a television program in the summer of 1975, and she learned TM, along with my son Stephen, who had just graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in June of 1975 and was enrolled in the Jewish Theological Seminary in Jerusalem to become a rabbi. And before he went to Jerusalem, he learned TM with my wife. And in August of 1975, I learned Transcendental Meditation and had an almost instant reconciliation with myself and who I was and what I did, and began to see life in an entirely different manner.